This little girl was found tied to a tree in the middle of the woods, weakened with a high fever and barely able to breathe. A note in her lap read simply, "She's my daughter. Take care of her." "I can't." When the police arrived, they expected to find a father in despair. But what they discovered shattered the version he had been trying to hide for years. Subscribe to the channel to receive heartwarming stories every day. The millionaire adjusted his silk tie in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in his walk-in closet. His eyes, cold as the steel of the skyscraper that bore his name downtown, revealed no emotion. Another day, another meeting, another multi-million-dollar deal. The platinum watch on his wrist read exactly 7 in the morning. Punctuality was an obsession, as was control. The mansion around him gleamed with artificial perfection. Immaculate marble, strategically placed works of art, each object chosen not for affection, but for the status it represented. The footsteps of the staff were nearly inaudible in the hallways. They knew the boss detested any sign of human presence disturbing the meticulous order of his world. "Your coffee, sir," announced the housekeeper without looking directly at him. "On the terrace," he replied dryly as he checked the news on his tablet. Another report about his growing fortune, another article about his business genius. The empire he had built was his entire identity. Meanwhile, 6 bedrooms away, in the least lit corridor of the East Wing, a small figure shivered under the sheets. Her hair stuck to her forehead with fever, her parched lips begging for water that no one brought. The 6-year-old girl hugged the only toy she owned, a faded teddy bear, a gift from the mother she believed was dead. On the bedroom door, an electronic lock ensured that the child remained invisible to the outside world. For 3 days, no one had entered there except the contracted nurse, who administered medication and left quickly, as if the air in the room were toxic. The girl had learned not to cry loudly. When she did, the dose of sedatives increased. She had learned not to ask for company. When she did, she went without dinner. And she had learned, above all, not to mention the seizures that shook her. "Like a leaf in the wind, Daddy will be mad," she whispered to the bear, her only witness. "Sick people make him sad." The illness had started with small signs. First, unexplained falls. Then moments of absence, her gaze lost in emptiness. Finally, the seizures, intense and frightening. The diagnosis came with incomprehensible words for her. Progressive, rare, experimental treatment, high cost, undesirable public exposure. Downstairs, the millionaire glided through the main hall, where a gigantic painting showed a family portrait, him, his deceased wife, and a smiling child who looked nothing like the feverish girl in the locked room. His official wife had never known of the existence of the illegitimate daughter. When she died in an accident 3 years earlier, the millionaire brought the girl home, not out of affection, but to maintain control over every aspect of his life, including the secrets. "The helicopter is ready, sir," informed the security. "God!" The millionaire nodded, walking towards the private helipad. From above, his property looked like a perfect, untouchable kingdom. No one could imagine the secret that was deteriorating within its walls. That same morning, miles away, a simple woman arranged her nurse's uniform. In her tired eyes, she kept the memory of the child she believed she had lost. On her wrist, the mark of a bracelet, identical to the one she had placed on her newborn daughter. A bracelet that the millionaire never noticed, too occupied with the public image he needed to maintain. "Maybe today is the day," she whispered to the mirror. The same phrase she had repeated daily for 6 years, unaware that her daughter was struggling to breathe, trapped in a gilded fortress, invisible to the world. The millionaire never looked at the starry sky that so enchanted his daughter in the rare times she could peek through the window. For him, only numbers, contracts, and the obsession with perfection existed. For the girl, only feverish dreams of a freedom she could barely comprehend remained. The mansion's meeting room was as silent as a courtroom. The specialist doctor, brought discreetly from abroad, adjusted his glasses as he organized the tests on the mahogany table. His grave expression foreshadowed the news he brought. The millionaire remained impassive, his hands clasped in his lap, as if he were about to hear about another corporate acquisition and not about the fate of his own daughter. "The results are conclusive," began the doctor, his low voice carrying the weight of years of experience in similar cases. "The syndrome is progressing faster than we expected. The medications are not controlling the seizures, and the neurological impairment is significant." "How long?" asked the millionaire, the same question he asked when analyzing risky investments. The doctor sighed, disturbed by the coldness. "Without the experimental treatment I mentioned, months, maybe a year, with a lot of pain and progressive deterioration." "And is the treatment guaranteed to succeed?" "There is no absolute guarantee, but there are promising cases. The problem is that the procedure is performed only in 2 medical centers in the world, and both require hospitalization for an indefinite period. It would be impossible to maintain discretion." The word hung in the air like a sentence. Discretion, what the millionaire valued most. Exposing the existence of his daughter would mean admitting the lie he had sustained for years. It would mean that journalists would investigate his past, discover the biological mother, question the forced disappearance. His empire built on the image of moral perfection would crumble. "Is there another alternative?" he asked, adjusting the watch on his wrist. "Palliative care. We can minimize suffering, but not stop the progression. A full-time team would be needed." The millionaire stood up abruptly. "Thank you, doctor. My assistant will arrange your payment." "Sir," insisted the doctor, "the girl is suffering. She needs—" "I know what my daughter needs." The millionaire cut him off, his voice as sharp as a razor. Discretion is non-negotiable. As the doctor gathered his documents, disturbed by the situation, the housekeeper entered hurriedly. "Sir, the girl is having another seizure. The nurse can't control it." The millionaire stared out the window at the cloudy sky that promised a storm. Something inside him, perhaps the last vestige of humanity, trembled slightly. For a fleeting moment, he remembered the woman he had loved years ago, the promise he had made to always protect their daughter. Before the fortune transformed him, before the obsession with control devoured any ability to feel. "Increase the medication," he ordered, glancing again at his watch. "I have a flight to London in 2 hours." That night, as the millionaire's private jet sliced through the Atlantic, the little girl stared at the ceiling of her room, her eyes glazed over from the excess of sedatives. She was so weak she could barely hold her teddy bear. The fever had returned, stronger this time, and no one answered when she called. On the bedroom door, a new security system had been installed, not to protect her but to contain her. Across town, the biological mother finished another shift at the county hospital. While organizing medications, a colleague commented on a rare case of childhood neurological syndrome that would be discussed at a conference. "They say it's genetic," explained the colleague. "The symptoms start around age 5. Have you ever seen anything like it?" The woman felt an inexplicable chill. The same age her daughter would be now. She shook her head, pushing away painful thoughts, unaware that her maternal intuition was alerting her to something real and urgent. In the silent mansion, under the dim light of a lamp, the housekeeper found something that deeply disturbed her. A medical document with recommendations for end-of-life procedures and minimization of terminal suffering. You didn't have to be a doctor to understand what that meant. With trembling hands, she did something she never imagined. Took a photograph of the document with her personal cell phone. "This isn't right," she murmured to herself as she looked at the hallway leading to the girl's room. That same night, 3 people were making decisions that would forever change the course of that story. The millionaire who coldly contemplated the options about his daughter's future, the housekeeper torn between loyalty to her employer and her conscience, and the biological mother who dreamed of a reunion she believed to be impossible. The storm brewing in the sky was only a prelude to what was to come. The downpour battered the windows of the mansion when the millionaire returned from London. His face, illuminated by lightning, revealed lines of exhaustion and something else, a somber determination that made the housekeeper recoil instinctively when he passed through the foyer. "How is the girl?" he asked without looking directly at the employee. "The fever isn't breaking, sir. The nurse suggested hospitalization, but was awaiting your orders." A heavy silence settled between them. The millionaire walked to the bar and poured himself an expensive whiskey, the amber liquid reflecting the light of the rays that cut through the sky. "Hospitalization will not be necessary," he said finally. "I have already arranged another solution." The housekeeper felt a pang in her chest. In the 2 weeks that the boss had been away, she had spent more time with the girl than in all the previous years. Despite the express orders to limit contact, something in the fragility of that child had awakened in her a compassion she couldn't ignore. "What solution, sir?" "That's none of your concern," he cut her off, turning around with the glass in his hand. "Just make sure the nurse isn't present tomorrow night. Tell her I gave her paid time off." The tone did not admit questioning. The housekeeper nodded, lowering her eyes, but her mind worked frantically. In recent weeks, she had found more disturbing documents, references to discreet transfer, end-of-life procedures, and, most alarmingly, a map of a remote forest, area marked with an X in red. In the isolated room, the girl slept an uneasy sleep. Her small and fragile body barely formed a volume under the blankets. On the bedside table, bottles of medications too strong for a 6-year-old child. On her wrist, the medical bracelet she never took off, a gift from the mother she believed was dead, but which actually contained a phone number that the millionaire had never noticed. "She's not a problem to be discarded," the housekeeper muttered to herself, remembering the cold words she had heard the boss say on the phone days ago. That same night, in her modest apartment, the biological mother woke up, startled. A vivid nightmare had tormented her. She saw her daughter calling for help, tied to a tree while the rain fell relentlessly. She sat up in bed, her heart racing, her hands trembling. It wasn't the first time she had this dream, but it had never been so real, so urgent. "It's just a dream," she repeated to herself, but something within her screamed that it wasn't. The next day, the millionaire locked himself in his office. He made a series of calls, all in a low and controlled tone. He cancelled meetings for the next few days, transferred significant amounts to accounts abroad. To anyone observing him, they would seem like the calculated moves of a businessman. To the housekeeper, who had known him for years, they were the preparations for something terrible. When night fell, the millionaire dismissed almost all the employees, something unprecedented. The mansion, normally busy with the presence of the security and service team, was strangely silent. Only the housekeeper remained, pretending to organize the kitchen while watching the boss's movements through the internal camera system that she had learned to access secretly. At 11 p.m. he entered the girl's room. He wore dark, practical clothes, so different from the impeccable suits he habitually wore. In his arms he carried a blanket and a small backpack. The housekeeper held her breath as she saw the scene on the monitor. The millionaire rapped, his daughter in the blanket, with mechanical movements like packing a package, not a child. The girl, sedated, offered no resistance. "My God," whispered the housekeeper, pulling out her cell phone. Her hands trembled so much that she almost dropped the device. There were 2 numbers saved on the screen. the police, and the one she had. Found on the medical document, identified only as emergency contact. In the backyard, the millionaire placed the girl in the back seat of a simple car, not his luxurious collection of vehicles, but a common model, difficult to track. Next to her, he left a bottle of water and a small bag with some food. On his face, normally impenetrable, a shadow of hesitation. For a fleeting moment, he looked at his sleeping daughter. Something in that innocent face seemed to pierce the armor he had built up over the years. He remembered when he held her for the first time, the silent vow he had made to always protect her. How had they reached this point? When had the empire become more important than his own flesh and blood? But the moment passed. The cold pragmatism that had made him a billionaire reassumed control. In his distorted mind, he was doing the girl a favor, freeing her from a life of suffering, from an incurable disease, from an existence that would be nothing but pain. He had convinced himself it was mercy, not cowardice. "Goodbye," he murmured, closing the car door. As the vehicle disappeared into the rainy night, the housekeeper made 2 calls that would change the course of that story forever. The first to the police, the second to a number she had no idea who it belonged to, but which her intuition told her was crucial. On the other end of the line, the sleepy voice of a woman answered. A woman who for 6 years had been waiting for a sign from the daughter she believed she had lost. The rain fell relentlessly on the forest as the first rays of morning tried to penetrate the dense canopy of trees. The humid air carried a disturbing silence, broken only by the constant dripping and occasionally by a weak moan, so weak that it could be mistaken for the wind among the leaves. The girl trembled uncontrollably. The blanket, soaked by the nightly rain, offered no protection against the cold. Her lips, purple and chapped, could barely articulate words. The fever that had already consumed her before now burned with renewed intensity, fueled by exposure to the elements. The ropes on her wrists and ankles had left red marks on her pale skin. The millionaire had left her there hours earlier, tied to the trunk of an ancient tree. A note inside a plastic bag lay on her lap. "She's my daughter. Take care of her. I can't." The words, written in the same meticulous handwriting that signed million-dollar contracts, now seemed like a distorted confession. Before leaving, he had hesitated one last time. Something primitive and paternal had tried to emerge from the abyss of indifference he had cultivated over the years. For a fleeting second, he almost abandoned the plan. But then he thought of the consequences, the scandal, the exposure, the ruin of everything he had built, and he left, convincing himself that someone would find the girl early in the morning, that hikers often passed by that trail. What he didn't foresee was the storm that intensified overnight, driving away any possible savior. He didn't foresee that the girl, in her extreme fragility, might not survive until dawn. Miles away, 2 hikers advanced determinedly along the muddy trail. The man, middle-aged and with steady steps, constantly checked a GPS device. The woman, younger, carried in her eyes an almost supernatural urgency. "It should be around here," said the man, pointing to a fork in the trail. "According to the coordinates the housekeeper sent." The woman did not answer. Since the phone call in the early morning hours, she could not articulate more than a few words. The possibility that her daughter, the daughter she had believed dead for 6 years, might be alive, had left her in a state of shock. And now, the idea that this same child was abandoned in the forest, sick and alone, had transformed the shock into a fierce determination. "Listen!" she exclaimed suddenly, stopping in the middle of the road. The man froze, trying to filter the sounds of the forest. For a moment, they heard only the rain. Then, weak and distant, a moan. The woman did not wait for confirmation. She darted in the direction of the sound, slipping in the mud, ignoring the branches that scratched her face, and then, in a small clearing they saw, the tiny figure tied to the tree, almost disappearing under the soaked blanket. The man, an experienced police officer who had witnessed terrible scenes, felt his stomach churn. The woman simply stopped breathing. "My God," she whispered, advancing, as if in a trance. When she approached and saw the girl's face, the face she knew only from dreams and fragmented memories, something broke inside her. A violent sob escaped her throat as she fell to her knees before the child. "Daughter," she said, the word carrying 6 years of contained pain. The girl opened her feverish eyes, unfocused. She murmured something inaudible. The police officer was already working to cut the ropes, speaking quickly on the radio, requesting urgent air rescue. The woman, with trembling hands, wrapped the child in her own dry coat, rubbing the small, icy limbs, trying to transmit warmth. "You're safe now," she repeated, tears mixing with the rain on her face. "Mommy is here. Mommy found you." The girl did not understand what was happening. In her feverish delirium, she believed she was dreaming. The same dream she had had so many times in the isolated room of the mansion. The dream where a woman with a gentle smile hugged her and called her daughter. The dream where there was no pain, no loneliness. "I need to check something," said the police officer, examining the medical bracelet on the child's wrist. The housekeeper mentioned that this could be important. Carefully, he turned the small metal plate. On the back, engraved in tiny letters, was a phone number, the same number she had called hours before, the number of the woman who was now hugging the girl. "You put this on her," he stated, not as a question. The woman nodded, unable to speak while examining her daughter's pale face. "Before he took her," she explained finally, "when I realized I couldn't stop him, I put this bracelet on her. He told me she had died at birth, but he never showed me the body. I knew. Something inside me knew." The sound of an approaching helicopter interrupted her words. The rescue was arriving. As the medical team quickly descended by rope, the police officer meticulously photographed the scene, documenting the ropes, the note, the child's conditions. "This will be the end of him," said the police officer, more to himself than to the woman. She looked at her daughter being prepared for transport, the paramedics already applying the first emergency procedures. "I don't want it to be the end of him," she replied, her voice suddenly firm. "I want him to live to see our daughter flourish despite what he did. I want him to see what he could have had if he hadn't chosen the empire instead of love." As the helicopter took off with the girl and her mother on board, the police officer looked at the trail from which they had come. Somewhere, in a secluded mansion, a man believed he had solved his problem. He didn't know that he had just lost everything that really mattered, and in the little girl's hand, clenched with surprising strength for someone so fragile, was the faded teddy bear, the only thing the millionaire had allowed her to bring on her final journey. The only link to a past that would now be completely rewritten. The sterile corridors of the children's hospital pulsed with a contained energy. Doctors and nurses moved with silent efficiency, but their glances repeatedly converged on the isolated room at the end of the hallway, where the story that dominated the news was unfolding in real time. The girl rescued from the forest rested in a hospital bed surrounded by equipment. Tubes and sensors monitored every aspect of her weakened body. The fever had subsided after intensive treatment, but the doctors maintained grave expressions during their visits. The rare neurological syndrome that afflicted her had not disappeared. With the rescue, it was an invisible enemy that continued its relentless march. Beside the bed, tireless, the biological mother held her small hand in her own. She had not left since arriving, refusing to abandon her daughter even to rest. Her eyes, although exhausted, carried a renewed light, the light of one who rediscovers a long-lost purpose. "The preliminary tests confirm the diagnosis," explained the neurologist, flipping through the chart. "It's Harrington syndrome, exactly as we suspected, progressive and rare, but not necessarily terminal, as someone must have told her father." "Is there treatment?" asked the woman, her voice hoarse from crying. "Yes, experimental but promising. We started the basic approach, and we have already requested her inclusion in the international program. The abandonment she was subjected to greatly aggravated her condition, but children have a surprising ability to recover." On the other side of the glass separating the room from the hallway, the detective in charge of the case observed the scene. In his hands, a file that grew thicker with each hour with new evidence, statements from the housekeeper, medical records stolen from the mansion, security camera images showing the millionaire leaving with the girl on that fateful night. "How is she?" asked the prosecutor, who had just arrived. "Stable, according to the doctors, miraculously." The prosecutor, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes who had seen it all, quickly leafed through the documents that the detective handed her. "This is more serious than we imagined," she murmured, stopping on a specific paper. "He falsified the mother's death certificate, manipulated the judicial system to obtain sole custody based on a lie, and when the girl got sick, tried to discard her as an inconvenient problem," completed the detective, his voice full of revulsion. "Preferred to abandon her to die rather than risk his public image being tarnished." Inside the room, oblivious to the judicial storm that was forming, the girl opened her eyes slowly. Confused, she looked around, expecting to find the familiar walls of her isolated room in the mansion. Instead, she saw soft lights, walls colored with drawings of animals, and a face she recognized instantly, not from real life, but from recurring dreams. "Mummy?" she whispered, her voice almost inaudible. The woman froze, tears welling up instantly. It was the first time she had heard her daughter's voice in 6 years. The first time she was called mother by the one she thought she had lost forever. "I'm here, my love," she replied, leaning closer. "I'm here and I'll never leave you again." The girl frowned, confused. "But Daddy said you were in heaven." The pain that went through the mother's heart was almost physical. "No, honey, I've always been here looking for you. Your father, he didn't tell you the truth." In the hallway, the medical team gathered with newly arrived specialists. One of them, coming especially from Switzerland, was considered the world's leading authority on the treatment of Harrington syndrome. "I analyzed the tests," he said, pointing to brain images. "The case is serious, but we are far from a terminal prognosis. With the appropriate protocol, we can stabilize the symptoms and potentially reverse some of the neurological damage." "That completely contradicts what the father was told," observed a local neurologist. "Exactly. Either he consulted incompetent doctors or..." The specialist left the sentence in the air, but everyone understood the somber implication. At that moment, on the ground floor of the hospital, a luxury car parked. The millionaire, pale and visibly disturbed, walked towards the entrance. He had spent the last 2 days oscillating between denial and panic. When the first news about the rescue of a child in the forest emerged, he convinced himself that it was not his daughter. When the police appeared at his door with a search warrant, he tried to mobilize his legal team to bury the case. But when he saw the photograph of the girl being carried to the helicopter, and more devastatingly, the face of the woman accompanying her, he knew that his carefully constructed empire was about to crumble. At the hospital reception, he was immediately recognized. Before he could identify himself, 2 police officers approached. "Sir, we have a warrant for your arrest." He offered no resistance. A part of him, the one that could still feel something besides self-preservation, almost felt relief. The courtroom was packed when the millionaire entered, escorted by 2 police officers. The impeccable suit could not mask the sickly pallor of his face, nor the deep dark circles that showed sleepless nights. The flashes of cameras exploded like lightning, capturing the moment that no one had imagined possible, the man who graced the cover of business magazines as a symbol of success, now handcuffed and downcast. The judge, an austere man with decades of experience, banged the gavel to begin the session. The silence that followed was almost palpable, charged with expectation and collective indignation. "We are here for the custody hearing of case number 47892, announced the court clerk. "Charges of attempted aggravated homicide, abandonment of a disabled person, falsification of public documents, procedural fraud, and perjury." In the front rows, the prosecutor methodically organized her notes. Beside her, the detective who coordinated the investigation watched the millionaire with a mixture of revulsion and professional curiosity. How did someone reach that point? What was the exact moment when a person decided that their reputation was worth more than the life of their own daughter? "The prosecution requests pretrial detention," declared the prosecutor, rising. "The defendant represents a clear risk to society, especially to the victim, and has the resources to evade the country." The defense attorney, one of the most expensive in the country, hurried to object. "Your Honor, my client has no criminal record. He is a respected businessman, employing thousands of people. What happened was clearly a temporary lapse, caused by the pressure of dealing alone with his daughter's terminal illness." Terminal illness. The prosecutor's voice cut through the air like a blade. "I request permission to call our first witness, who will clarify precisely that point." With the judge's approval, the Swiss specialist in Harrington syndrome took the stand. His credentials, read aloud, impressed even the experienced judge. "Doctor, after examining the girl and all her previous tests, what can you tell us about her diagnosis?" The doctor adjusted his glasses, his expression grave. "The child suffers from Harrington syndrome, a rare and progressive neurological condition. However, contrary to what was apparently told to the father, the condition is not terminal. With the appropriate treatment, which we have already started, she can have a relatively normal life with some limitations, but far from any death sentence." A murmur swept through the room. The millionaire visibly shrank in his chair. "Doctor, in your professional opinion, could the abandonment to which the child was subjected have resulted in death?" "Without a doubt. We found traces of medications in her bloodstream that suggest prolonged sedation. Combined with exposure to the elements, high fever and dehydration, the probability of death was extremely high. It was a miracle that they found her in time." The next witness was the housekeeper. As she entered, she avoided looking directly at her former boss. Her hands trembled slightly as she took the oath. "Ma'am, why did you decide to contact the authorities on that specific night?" The housekeeper took a deep breath. "In recent months, I saw the girl deteriorate rapidly. The boss increasingly restricted access to her, even by health professionals. When I found the documents about the transfer and the map of the forest, I knew that something terrible was being planned." "And what about the child's mother? Did you know she was alive?" "Not until I found the girl's complete medical record. There was an emergency contact number that the boss never mentioned. When I saw him preparing the girl that night, I knew I had to act." The interrogation continued with the millionaire's personal physician, who admitted to being pressured to exaggerate the severity of the girl's condition in his reports. He insisted on knowing the worst-case scenario, ignoring all the treatment alternatives I suggested, but it was the testimony of the financial investigator that caused the greatest impact. With clinical precision, he presented documents that revealed the true motivation behind the millionaire's actions. "We identified substantial transfers to an account in the Cayman Islands 2 days before the incident. Upon further investigation, we discovered that the defendant was about to close a historic merger with a conservative conglomerate from the Middle East. The contract, which we obtained by court order, contained a morality clause that would nullify the deal if any personal scandal came to light. The judge leaned forward. What kind of scandal? Any that contradicted the defendant's public image as a dedicated widower who lost his wife in a tragic accident. The existence of an illegitimate daughter, the result of a previous relationship, with a woman he claimed was dead, would definitely qualify as a violation of the clause. A stunned silence took over the room. The prosecutor allowed the information to be absorbed before delivering her final blow. Your Honor, I request the addition of a new charge, attempted aggravated homicide for despicable motive. The defendant not only tried to get rid of his sick daughter, but did so to protect a billion-dollar deal. Outside the courthouse, journalists were broadcasting live every development of the case that had captured national attention. The millionaire's empire was crumbling in real time. Stocks plummeting, partners breaking contracts, former allies quickly distancing themselves to avoid contamination by association. At the hospital, oblivious to the media hurricane, the girl was experiencing for the first time in years what it was like to be treated like a normal child. Doctors spoke directly to her, explaining the procedures in simple language. Nurses brought games and colorful books. And her mother, the woman she had believed dead for years, did not leave her side for a minute. "Mommy!" called the girl as they watched a cartoon together on the television in the room. "Yes, my love. Is Daddy coming back to get me?" The small voice trembled with fear. The woman felt her heart tighten. How to explain to a 6-year-old child the monstrosity her father had committed? How to protect her from the truth without perpetuating lies? "No, honey. Your father, he won't be able to take care of you for a long time, but I'm here now and we'll stay together forever." The girl processed the information slowly, her large eyes fixed on the faded teddy bear she wouldn't let go of. "He used to get mad when I got sick," she said finally, in a low voice. "Said I ruined everything." The mother swallowed the tears, maintaining her composure for her daughter. "You never ruined anything, my love. You're perfect exactly as you are, and your illness, we're treating it. The doctors say you're going to get better." "Really?" The pale face lit up with a hesitant smile, perhaps the first genuine one in years. "Really, and you know what? There are many children here at the hospital who have the same syndrome as you. Tomorrow, if you're feeling well, we can meet some of them." The girl nodded, snuggling closer to her mother. In her small world, the pieces were slowly beginning to rearrange themselves. She did not fully understand what had happened, nor why her father had left her in the forest, but she felt, with the instinctive wisdom of children, that she had finally found a safe harbor. In the courthouse, the hearing was coming to an end. The judge, visibly impacted by the testimonies, announced his decision. "Given the seriousness of the charges and the overwhelming evidence presented, I order the pre-trial detention of the defendant without the right to bail." The millionaire, who had kept his head down throughout the session, finally raised his eyes. His gaze swept the crowded room, lingering for a moment on the image of his mansion being displayed on one of the journalists' monitors, the gilded fortress that had become his prison long before the real handcuffs. As he was led out, a reporter shouted the question everyone wanted to ask. "Why did you do this to your own daughter?" The millionaire paused for a second. His lips moved as if he were going to respond, but no sound came out. Perhaps because even now he couldn't admit the simplest and most terrible truth. He had become so obsessed with his public image, so dependent on the admiration of others, that he had forgotten how to love. At the hospital, at that very moment, the girl fell asleep in her mother's arms, tightly holding her teddy bear. For the first time in years, her sleep was not induced by sedatives, but by the genuine comfort of feeling loved and protected. On her face, an expression of peace that no fortune in the world could buy. And so, while an empire crumbled under the weight of its own lies, a small and fragile life began, finally, to flourish. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Spring arrived, bringing with it the rebirth that the season promises, not only for nature but also for the girl who now lived in a small, cozy apartment in the suburbs of the city. Far from the opulent luxury of the mansion, but infinitely richer in human warmth and true love, the Millionaire's trial had become an unprecedented media spectacle. Each revelation more shocking than the last, each testimony more devastating. Public opinion, initially divided between disbelief and condemnation, had solidified into a consensus of revulsion. The man who once personified American success had transformed into the symbol of the moral corruption that money and power could engender. One sunny morning in April, the mother prepared breakfast while watching her daughter draw at the small kitchen table. 6 months of intensive treatment had produced results that doctors described as remarkable. The seizures, once frequent, were now rare and controlled. The motor skills, compromised by the syndrome, showed significant improvement. The girl, who could barely hold a pencil, now created colorful drawings, albeit with hesitant strokes. "What are you drawing, honey?" asked the mother, placing a glass of orange juice next to the child. "Our family," replied the girl, focused on her work. The mother leaned over to see 2 figures holding hands under a smiling sun. Only 2. There was no representation of the absent father, now serving pre-trial detention while awaiting the final sentence. In a controversial but compassionate decision, the judge had determined that the girl would not need to testify in person at the trial. Her testimony had been taken in a protected environment with psychological support and presented on video during the sessions. The intercom rang, interrupting the quiet moment. The mother answered, surprised to hear the voice of the detective who had led the case. "We need to talk," he said, his grave voice indicating that it was not a casual visit. Minutes later, sitting in the small living room filled with toys and children's books, the detective explained the situation while the girl remained entertained with her drawings in the room. "His lawyers are proposing a deal," he revealed, his expression tense. "They want to reduce the charges in exchange for substantial compensation for the child." The mother stiffened, her face suddenly pale. "Does he think he can buy forgiveness after what he did?" "It's more complicated than that," sighed the detective. "There's new information that came to light during the asset investigation. Information that could significantly change the course of the process." Carefully, he opened a folder and extracted some documents. The mother examined them, confused at first, then progressively more horrified. "It can't be," she murmured, her voice almost inaudible. "Unfortunately, it is. When he transferred custody to himself after claiming your death, he also transferred all rights to the experimental medical treatment that was being developed for the girl's syndrome." "What treatment?" "There was never any treatment. Not for her, no. But the research continued, funded by the father. The scientists didn't know that the main beneficiary had been discarded. They worked thinking they were helping the financier's daughter." The mother let the papers fall on the table, stunned by the revelation. The man who had abandoned his own daughter to die was the same one who, paradoxically, funded the research that could save her. The treatment she is receiving now, which is working so well, is a direct result of that research, continued the detective. The medications, the protocols, everything was developed with his money. A heavy silence settled in the room. From the doorway of the room, the girl peeked discreetly, sensing the tension in the air without understanding its origin. "What exactly does he want?" finally asked the mother, her voice controlled. "Reduction of the sentence, and, most importantly, For him, the possibility of continuing to manage some companies from prison. In exchange, he guarantees that the research continues to be funded and establishes a trust fund for the girl that will cover all future treatments and education. The mother stood up abruptly, walking to the window. Outside, life went on as normal, people rushing, cars passing, children playing in the nearby park. How to decide something of this magnitude? How to balance justice and pragmatism when her daughter's future was at stake? He also wants to see her, added the detective almost reluctantly, a supervised visit before the final sentence. Never! The answer came instantaneously, viscerally. After what he did, the decision is entirely yours, assured the detective. The judge made it clear that any contact depends exclusively on your consent as legal guardian. I'm just conveying the request. At that moment, the girl entered the room, approaching her mother timidly. Her large eyes, which had seen more suffering than any child should endure, now shone with renewed curiosity. "Who's the man, Mommy?" "A friend," replied the mother, forcing a smile. "He helped bring you back to me, remember?" The girl nodded, studying the detective with that peculiar intensity that she had developed during the years of isolation. The ability to read people and situations, developed as a survival mechanism. "You're talking about my father," she said, not as a question but as a statement. The adults exchanged surprised glances. The child's perceptiveness often caught them off guard. "Yes, honey," admitted the mother, bending down to be at her daughter's height. "We're talking about some important things related to him." The girl considered the information for a moment, her forehead furrowed in concentration. Then, with the disconcerting simplicity of children, she asked the question that the adults feared. "Is he still mad at me for being sick?" The mother's heart broke. Even after everything, even after the abandonment and betrayal, the child still took the blame, still believed she had done something wrong to deserve the treatment she had received. "No, my love," she replied, hugging her daughter tightly. "You never did anything wrong, never. Your father, he had problems that had nothing to do with you. Then why did he leave me in the forest?" The question hung in the air, heavy and inevitable. The detective looked away, giving the mother space to deal with the impossible moment. "Sometimes," she began, choosing her words with extreme care, "adults make very wrong choices. Not because the children deserve it, but because the adults are confused or scared. Your father made a terrible choice, and that's why he's being punished. But that was never, ever your fault." The girl absorbed the words in silence. Then, with a wisdom that transcended her age, she asked, "Is he sad now?" The question caught the mother off guard. Sad? The man who had calculatingly abandoned his own daughter to die, who had falsified documents, lied under oath, manipulated the system to protect his fortune and image. Did he deserve the benefit of human emotions like sadness or regret? Before she could answer, the girl continued, "Because I used to be very sad in that dark room. Even with everything he did, I don't want anyone to be sad like that." The detective, an experienced man who had seen the worst aspects of human nature, felt a lump in his throat. The compassion of that child, after all she had suffered, was the most extraordinary thing he had ever witnessed. "I think he is very sad, yes," he replied finally, when he realized that the mother was unable to speak. "And I think that for the first time in his life, he understands what he did." The girl nodded gravely, as if that confirmed something important to her. Then she turned her attention to her mother, touching her face gently, wiping away tears that she hadn't even realized were falling. "Don't cry, Mummy. We're okay now, aren't we?" The mother hugged her daughter tightly, marveling at the resilience of that small being who, after knowing the worst of humanity, could still manifest the best of it. After the girl returned to her room, the detective and the mother continued the discussion in a low voice. There were no easy decisions, only impossible choices between absolute justice and practical well-being, between the past that could not be changed and the future that was yet to be built. "I want him to pay for what he did," declared the mother finally, "but not at the cost of her treatment. If the agreement guarantees that the research continues and that she has everything she needs, we will ensure that it is legally irrevocable," assured the detective. "He will not be able to go back on it regardless of what happens." "And what about the visit?" The detective hesitated. "It's a very personal decision. There's no right answer." The mother looked through the ajar door, watching her daughter drawing. Intently, her tongue appearing slightly at the corner of her mouth, a gesture so innocent, so normal, so precious after everything they had been through. "I don't know if I can allow him to see her after what he did," she admitted, "but I also don't know if I have the right to prevent it if she wants to. She has already had too many choices stolen from her." That night, long after the detective left and the girl fell asleep, the mother stayed awake, contemplating the stars through the window of the small apartment. The same stars that shone over the luxurious cell where the millionaire spent his nights, and over the forest where, months earlier, a child had almost lost her life. The same stars that had witnessed the worst and the best of humanity in that still unfinished story. The pediatric rehabilitation center pulsed with a vibrant energy that contrasted sharply with the traditional hospital environment. Colored walls displayed drawings of children in recovery. Wide corridors allowed wheelchair races, and spacious rooms echoed with laughter and lively conversations. It was a place of healing, not only physical, but emotional. The girl, now with longer hair and less pale cheeks, sat focused in front of a complex puzzle. Her fingers, once fragile and trembling, now manipulated the pieces with increasing dexterity. Beside her, a boy approximately the same age watched attentively. "You're very fast," he commented, amazed. She smiled, a smile that now came more easily. "I've had a lot of time to practice. My mom brings me here every day." "Is it true that you were on TV? My mom said you're famous." The girl hesitated, her expression momentarily clouded. Although she had been protected from media exposure, it was impossible to completely hide the interest that her case had aroused. Children have an infallible radar to perceive when they are different. "I don't really like talking about it," she replied finally, fitting another piece into place. The boy nodded, accepting the answer with the generous ease of children. "Do you want to play basketball later? There's a lower hoop for those who are our size." The suggestion was interrupted by the arrival of the occupational therapist, a young woman with a welcoming smile and inexhaustible energy. "How are we doing today? I see the puzzle is almost done." The girl nodded, proud. 6 months ago, she couldn't even hold the pieces without dropping them. Progress was slow but consistent, both in motor development and social integration. The extreme shyness, the result of years of isolation, gradually gave way to a cautious curiosity about the world and the people around her. "Mom said I have a surprise today after therapy," she commented as they put away the puzzle. "That's true," confirmed the therapist, exchanging a meaningful look with the mother who was watching from the door. "But first, let's work a little on those motor coordination exercises, okay?" Across town, in a visitation room of the state penitentiary, the millionaire waited seated, his hands restless on the metal table. The orange prison uniform contrasted grotesquely with his still aristocratic posture. 8 months of confinement had left their mark, hair more grey, wrinkles deeper, eyes permanently restless. The plea bargain had been finalized 2 weeks prior. His sentence, initially slated for 30 years, had been reduced to 15, with the possibility of parole after 10. The core businesses of his conglomerate had been sold off to pay restitution and fines, but some smaller subsidiaries remained under his remote control, managed by trusted executives. Most importantly, Funding for the Harrington syndrome research was secured by a shielded trust, as was the girl's financial future. The door opened, and the lawyer entered, accompanied by the corrections officer overseeing the visit. "Everything's ready," the lawyer informed him. "But I need to reiterate, this visit is a privilege, not a right. It can be terminated at any time at the discretion of the mother or child. There are no guarantees there will be others." The millionaire nodded, his throat suddenly dry. "I understand. I must also remind you that the conversation will be recorded and monitored. Any attempt at emotional manipulation or harassment will result in the immediate termination of the visit and the revocation of this clause in the agreement." "I know the rules," he replied, irritated. Then, controlling himself, he added more softly, "Sorry, I'm nervous." It was a rare admission for a man who had spent his life cultivating an image of unwavering control. In the weeks following his incarceration, as the initial shock wore off, something unexpected began to happen. Without the constant distractions of business, without the perpetual need to keep up appearances, long-suppressed memories began to surface. Recollections of his newborn daughter in his arms, the promise he had made to her mother, the man he had been before ambition consumed everything. The prison psychiatrist called it moral decompression, when the elaborate justifications that allowed for monstrous actions finally crumbled, leaving the person face to face with the stark truth of their deeds. For many, it was the beginning of recovery. For others, unbearable torture. The door opened again. The millionaire rose automatically, as if about to receive an important dignitary. But he was unprepared for the impact of seeing his daughter enter, a hand in hand with the woman he had once loved and whom he had betrayed in every possible way. The girl stopped in the doorway, hesitant. She wore blue overalls embroidered with stars, and her hair was styled in a simple braid. She seemed taller than he remembered, healthier. Her eyes, which had once been clouded by medication, now shone with vigilant attention. She recognized her father immediately, but showed neither fear nor joy, only a cautious curiosity. "Hello," she said, her voice small but firm. The millionaire tried to respond, but found he couldn't speak. A painful lump blocked his throat. How do you greet the child you tried to abandon to die? What words could possibly suffice? The mother guided the girl to the table, staying by her side like a guardian. Her eyes met her former partner's with a mixture of emotions impossible to decipher. Anger, yes, but also something more complex. Perhaps the understanding that the man before her was both a monster and a victim of his own distorted choices. "You can sit down if you want," she said to her daughter, "and remember what we talked about. We can leave any time you want." The girl nodded and sat in the chair across from her father, her legs swinging without reaching the floor. From the small backpack she carried, she removed her inseparable teddy bear, placing it on the table like a protective talisman. "Do you remember him?" she asked, pointing to the toy. The millionaire swallowed hard. "Yes. It's the bear that was with you since you were a baby. He stayed with me the whole time, even in the woods." The direct mention of the incident caused all the adults in the room to hold their breath. No one expected the child to address the matter so directly. The millionaire began, the words failing him again. "Did you cry when you left me there?" the girl asked with disconcerting childish frankness. The question hit him like a physical blow. For a moment he considered lying, saying yes, that he had cried, that he had suffered immensely with the decision. It would be the answer that would probably please everyone, but something in those small, serious eyes demanded truth. "No," he finally replied, his voice almost inaudible. "I didn't cry. I couldn't feel anything at that moment." The mother stiffened visibly, preparing to end the visit, but the girl simply nodded, as if the answer confirmed something she already knew. I couldn't cry sometimes either, she said, surprising everyone. When I was very, very sad in the dark room, sometimes no tears would come out. The nurse said it was because of the medicine, but I don't think it was just that. The millionaire looked at his daughter with a new and devastating understanding. This child, whom he had seen only as a problem to be eliminated, possessed an emotional depth and an ability to articulate that he had never noticed, that he had never bothered to discover. "Why did you want to see me today?" she continued, her head tilted slightly in genuine curiosity. He took a deep breath, searching for an answer he didn't know if he had. Why, really? To alleviate his guilt? To confirm that she was okay? To try to fix the irreparable? "Because I needed to see with my own eyes that you're doing better," he finally replied. "And because I wanted to say something I should have said a long time ago." "What?" "That I'm sorry, deeply, for what I did to you, for what I didn't do for you, for everything." The words seemed pathetic, inadequate in the face of the magnitude of the damage caused. But they were true, perhaps the most honest words he had ever spoken. To his surprise, the girl reached out a small hand and briefly touched his, a gesture so unexpected that for a moment no one in the room breathed. "Mommy says that very sad people sometimes do very bad things," she said. "Were you very sad?" The question, coming from a 6-year-old, contained a wisdom that completely disconcerted him. Was he sad? The word seemed too trivial to describe the existential emptiness that had consumed him for years, the constant feeling that nothing would ever be enough, that success was just a fragile facade covering an inner abyss. "I guess so," he replied, discovering the truth as he spoke. "But I didn't know it. I thought I was just busy, important." The girl considered the answer seriously, as if evaluating its sincerity. Then, with the simple and devastating logic of children, she asked, "And now? Are you still sad?" The millionaire looked at his daughter, at the woman he had once loved, at the grey walls of the prison that would be his home for the next several years. The answer came not as studied words, but as a physical, overwhelming emotion. Tears that he couldn't contain, flowing freely down his face for the first time in decades. "Yes," he managed to say between sobs, "but in a different way now, a way I can finally feel." The visit continued for a few more minutes. There were no grand, dramatic reconciliations or promises of a future together. Just simple questions, honest answers, and the hesitant beginning of something that wasn't forgiveness. It was too early for that, but perhaps understanding. As the girl got up to leave, hugging her teddy bear to her chest, she said something that would stay with her father forever. "I hope you find someone to talk to in there, like I have my therapist. She says talking about sad things helps them get a little less sad." As the door closed behind his daughter and former partner, the millionaire remained seated motionless. The man who had built an empire based on absolute control had been completely disarmed by the compassion of a child who had every reason to hate him. Outside, walking towards the car, the mother held her daughter's hand tightly. "How are you feeling, sweetie?" The girl thought for a moment, processing the experience in her own way. "Sad, but also relieved? Is that what you say when something heavy has come out of you?" The mother nodded, moved by her daughter's precise articulation. "Yes, that's exactly what you say." "I think he's relieved too," commented the girl, watching the birds flying overhead. "Even though he's in that sad place." The woman didn't respond. Immediately, her own journey of emotional processing was complex and far from complete. The man she had seen today, broken and vulnerable, seemed as distant from the young man she had fallen in love with years ago as from the calculating monster who had abandoned his own daughter to die. "You know what else makes me relieved?" she said finally, helping her daughter into the car. "Seeing you getting stronger and happier every day. The girl smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her face. "Can I have ice cream now? The therapist said I deserve a reward for being brave today." The mother laughed, grateful for her daughter's incredible resilience. "Of course you can, and I think I deserve one too, don't I?" As they drove away from the penitentiary, leaving behind a man facing the consequences of his choices, mother and daughter headed towards a future that, although marked by the past, would not be defined by it. The University Medical Center, with its imposing architecture and endless hallways, seemed to swallow the small figure of the girl, who walked hand in hand with her mother. It had been a year since the rescue in the woods, 10 months since the start of the experimental treatment, and 8 weeks since the last seizure, the longest period of stability since the diagnosis. "I'm nervous," admitted the mother, as they waited in the waiting room of the neurology department. The girl, now a recently turned 7, squeezed her mother's hand reassuringly. "It's going to be okay. My brain is stronger now. I can feel it." The simplicity of the statement drew a smile from the mother. It was true. The evolution was visible not only in the medical parameters, but in the child's growing vivacity, in the increasingly refined motor coordination, in the ability to concentrate that now allowed the start of formal literacy. "Family of patient 447, called the nurse, consulting the clipboard. "Dr. Mendez will see you now." The neurologist's office was decorated with drawings from child patients, a deliberate strategy to make the environment less intimidating. The doctor, a middle-aged man with kind eyes behind thick-framed glasses, rose to greet them. "Good morning. How is our little warrior today?" "Ready for the tests," replied the girl, with a seriousness that sometimes surprised the adults around her. The doctor smiled, pointing to the chair. "Excellent attitude. Let's start with a quick chat, okay?" Over the next hour, the girl underwent a battery of cognitive and motor tests, naming objects on cards, repeating number sequences, walking in a straight line, balancing on one foot. Simple tasks for typical children, but representing extraordinary achievements for someone with her condition. Finally, the decisive moment arrived. The review of the neuroimaging exams performed the previous week. The doctor projected the images onto the computer screen, comparing them side by side with those obtained at the start of treatment. "These areas in red," he explained, pointing to spots that dominated the first image, "represent the neuronal inflammation characteristic of the syndrome. And here," he moved the cursor to the most recent image, "we can see a significant reduction, almost 70%, of that inflammatory activity." The mother brought her hand to her mouth, containing her emotion. "That means..." "It means the treatment is working, and in an extraordinary way," confirmed the doctor, unable to hide his enthusiasm. "In fact, the results are so promising that we would like to document the case for scientific publication, obviously maintaining complete anonymity." "Publication?" asked the mother, surprised. "Yes. Her response to the experimental protocol is among the best we have ever documented. We are learning a lot from her case, which can help other children with the same condition." The girl, who was watching the conversation attentively, asked, "You mean my special brain is helping other special brains?" The doctor smiled at the perspicacity of the question. "Exactly that. You're a pioneer, you know, a trailblazer." The idea clearly pleased the girl, who smiled, proud. "Like astronauts, just like that, exploring unknown territories to pave the way for others." As the conversation continued, detailing adjustments to the medication and next steps in the treatment, the mother felt an overwhelming gratitude, not only for the medical progress, but for the opportunity to witness the development of her daughter's personality, her curiosity, her compassion, her resilience, qualities that could have been crushed forever had it not been for the extraordinary circumstances that brought them together. "There's one more thing we need to discuss," said the doctor, after finishing his clinical notes. "We received a communication from the foundation that funds the treatment. It seems there's been a significant expansion of the program." "What do you mean?" asked the mother, suddenly apprehensive. Any mention of the funding made her nervous, as it inevitably brought her back to the origin of the resources, the trust established by the girl's father as part of the plea bargain. "The good news is that not only is your daughter's treatment guaranteed indefinitely, but the program will now extend to 20 more children with the same syndrome who wouldn't otherwise have access." The information took the mother by surprise. That wasn't part of the original agreement. "Apparently," continued the doctor, consulting the document, "there was a directive to broaden the scope. The request came directly from the primary benefactor." The mother understood the veiled reference. The millionaire, even from prison, had expanded the treatment program beyond what was legally required. The question was, why? Genuine remorse or another PR strategy to reduce his sentence? "There's a little letter," said the doctor, handing over an envelope. "He asked us to give it to you, but only if you allow it, of course." The mother hesitated, looking at her daughter, who was now examining with interest an anatomical model of the brain on the table. She eventually accepted the envelope, but didn't open it. "I'll read it at home quietly," she decided. As they left the office, the girl proudly held the colorful sticker she had received as a reward for her cooperation during the exams. On the way home, they passed by the park, where they now had picnics. On Sundays, a recent tradition that they both loved. "Can we stop for a little bit?" asked the girl, pointing to the swings. The mother checked her watch. They still had time before the afternoon physical therapy session. "Sure, why not?" As she watched her daughter swinging with increasing confidence, higher and higher, freer and freer, the mother finally opened the envelope. The letter was short, handwritten in a script she recognized immediately, even after so many years. "This is not an attempt at redemption. I know some things are irreparable. It's just the recognition of a debt that I can never fully repay." 20 families received the news today that their children will have access to treatment. In each of those calls, I asked them to thank not me, but the courage of a girl who, despite everything she has suffered, taught a foolish old man what true strength means. I don't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I only ask that you know that the world is a better place because she is in it, and infinitely worse because I didn't know how to appreciate it when I had the chance. The letter was unsigned. It didn't need to be. The mother folded it carefully and put it in her bag. Someday, when her daughter was older and could fully understand, maybe she would show it to her, or maybe not. Some scars are best left alone. "Look, how high I'm going, Mommy!" shouted the girl from the swing, her face lit up with the joy of the moment. "I see you, my love. You're flying." And it was true, against all odds, against all the bleak prognoses. That child who had once been abandoned to die now launched herself confidently towards the sky, defying gravity as much as she defied the cruel fate that they had tried to impose on her. That afternoon, as they resumed their way home, the mother made a call. On the other end of the line, a female voice answered, the mother of another child with the same syndrome, whom they had met during one of the group therapy sessions. "I just received the most incredible news," said the woman, her voice choked with emotion. "Gabriel was accepted into the experimental program, all costs covered. They said that we should thank your daughter, that she somehow made it possible." The mother watched the girl walking a few steps ahead, stopping occasionally to examine a flower or wave at a dog. Each movement, each gesture, a small victory against the disease that had tried to define her, against the abandonment that could have destroyed her. "Yes," she replied simply. "She makes many things possible." Arriving home, they found a surprise at the door, a carefully wrapped package. Inside, a small but excellent quality telescope accompanied by a simple card. "For the explorer of unknown worlds, from an admirer, Dr. Sophia." The girl was ecstatic with the gift from the assistant neurologist, who had always shown special affection for her during the consultations. That same night, mother and daughter set up the telescope on the small balcony of the apartment and watched the stars together. The same stars that had witnessed the darkest moment of their lives and now illuminated an unexpectedly promising future. "You know what I like most about the sky?" asked the girl, her eye glued to the lens of the telescope. "What, my love?" "That even when there are dark clouds covering everything, the stars are still up there. We just can't see them for a little while." The mother hugged her daughter, amazed once again by the wisdom that emanated from that little being. "That's right. They've always been there, like the love that had never ceased to exist between them, even when brutal circumstances had separated them, like the inner strength that the girl had always possessed, even when kept in the shadows by fear and cruelty, like the possibility of healing that had been present all along, waiting only for the opportunity to flourish." 5 years had passed since the day of the rescue in the woods. The small apartment in the suburbs had been replaced by a modest but comfortable house, with a garden where the girl, now 11 years old, grew her own flowers. In her room, walls covered in drawings, books on shelves, and a more advanced telescope than the first, a present for her 10th birthday. It was an ordinary Saturday morning with the aroma of pancakes filling the kitchen. The girl, her hair, now long and styled in a braid, helped to set the table for breakfast. Her movements were fluid, precise, nothing reminiscent of the debilitated child of years ago. The seizures, although not completely eliminated, had become rare and mild. The experimental treatment had become standard protocol, benefiting hundreds of children around the world. "There's mail for you," said the mother, handing over an official envelope with the university letterhead. The girl opened it carefully, her eyes quickly scanning the contents. A smile lit up her face. "I've been accepted into the science program for gifted youth," she exclaimed, jumping for joy. "I'll be able to spend the summer in the neuroscience lab. Dr. Sophia is going to be my mentor." The mother hugged her daughter, sharing her enthusiasm. The assistant neurologist, who had once gifted a child recovering from trauma with a telescope, had become a constant presence in their lives. First as a doctor, then as a friend, and now as a scientific mentor. "I'm so proud of you," she said, stepping back to admire her daughter. "Your essay about personal experience and scientific vocation must have really impressed the committee." The girl smiled, slightly shy. "I just told the truth." How understanding. "My own condition made me want to help other people with neurological problems." It was true. Her scientific interest had grown naturally from lived experience. Each medical consultation had turned into a learning opportunity, each book about the human brain devoured with genuine fascination. "I want to understand how it works so I can fix it," she explained to the adults, surprised by her precocious determination. Breakfast was interrupted by the ringing of the phone. The mother answered, her expression gradually becoming more serious. As she listened, the girl watched attentively, sensitive to any change in her mother's mood. "I understand," the mother said finally. "Thank you for letting me know personally." When she hung up, she remained silent for a moment, as if organizing her thoughts. "What happened?" asked the girl, her voice carrying a trace of apprehension. The mother sat back down at the table, gently holding her daughter's hands. "That was the lawyer in charge of your trust fund," she explained calmly. "Your father passed away last night at the prison hospital." The girl absorbed the information in silence. Her visits to her father had been sporadic over the years, 3 or 4 encounters annually, always in supervised settings. They never became close in the conventional sense, but they developed a peculiar relationship marked by an almost clinical honesty. He never tried to present himself as anything other than what he was, a man trying to repair irreparable damage, aware that complete forgiveness was beyond his reach. "Was it the cancer?" asked the girl, demonstrating, as always, a disconcerting maturity for her age. The mother nodded. The diagnosis of terminal cancer had come 8 months ago, and the progression had been rapid. The last visit had been just 3 weeks prior at the prison hospital. A debilitated man, almost unrecognizable compared to the powerful millionaire of years ago, and a pre-teen sitting next to his bed, reading to him a scientific article about the latest advances in the treatment of the syndrome that had once almost killed her. "He left something for you," continued the mother, handing over another envelope that the lawyer had delivered days before, with specific instructions that it be opened only after his death. The girl took the envelope carefully, as if handling something fragile. "Can I read it alone in my room?" "Of course, honey." As her daughter went upstairs, the mother remained in the kitchen, reflecting on the extraordinary journey they had traveled. She had never imagined, on that terrible night when she received the call about a child abandoned in the woods, that the story would unfold in such complex ways, that the man who had caused so much suffering would end up, through his imperfect attempts at redemption, helping to save hundreds of other children, that the girl would emerge from the trauma not broken, but strengthened, transforming her experience into purpose. In her room, sitting by the window overlooking the garden, the girl carefully opened the envelope. Inside, she found not only a letter, but also a small USB drive and an old key. The letter began without preamble. "When you read this, I will be gone. There are not enough words in any language to adequately express the regret I carry. I do not ask you to hold fond memories. Of me, I do not deserve them. I only ask that you know that the most lucid moments of my final years were those in your company, when I could glimpse the extraordinary person you became despite me, not because of me. The drive contains all the records of the research on Harrington. Syndrome, funding, findings, patents. Everything has been legally transferred to an independent foundation that bears your name while preserving your anonymity. You are too young to manage it now, but when the time comes, it will be your legacy to do with as you see fit. The key is to my old safe deposit box. Inside it, you will find something that belonged to your mother, and that I wrongly took when we separated. She never knew it was in my possession. It's time to return it to its rightful place. 5 years ago, you asked me if I had cried when I abandoned you in the woods. I answered no, and it was true. But there is something I didn't tell you. Since that first visit in prison, there hasn't been a single day when I haven't cried, remembering what I did. I don't say this to elicit sympathy, only so that you know that in the end, I recovered enough humanity to feel the weight of my actions. Continue your journey. Continue turning darkness into light. Continue proving that a person's value can never be measured by their usefulness or convenience, but by their simple and complete humanity. The letter was unsigned, just a symbol at the end, a small drawing of a teddy bear, similar to the one that had accompanied her in the forest, and that now rested worn but well cared for on a shelf in the room. The girl folded the letter slowly and walked to the window. Outside, the world continued its course, neighbors walking dogs, children playing, clouds moving slowly across the blue sky. The same world that had almost rejected her, and that now opened before her, full of possibilities. Her eyes lingered on the garden she cultivated so carefully, especially on the flowers she had planted in a circular bed, hardy species that bloomed even in adverse conditions. "Like you," her therapist had once commented, observing the robust plants. When she went back down to the kitchen, she found her mother finishing washing the breakfast dishes. "Are you okay?" asked the woman, drying her hands on her apron. The girl nodded, handing over the key. "This is for a safe deposit box. He said it has something that belonged to you." The mother examined the small key, confused at first, then with a flash of recognition. My locket. I thought I'd lost it during the move, so many years ago." "Can we get it someday?" asked the girl. "I'd like to see it." "Of course, honey. When you feel ready." The girl hugged her mother, a long, comforting hug full of everything that didn't need to be said out loud. Two survivors who had transformed a story of abandonment into a journey of recovery and discovery. "I think I'll work on my science project," she said, finally turning away. "I want to have something really good to show Dr. Sophia on Monday." The mother smiled, watching her daughter climb the stairs again, no longer the fragile child tied to a tree, no longer the scared girl of the first therapy sessions, but a young woman determined to transform her own experience of pain into knowledge that could alleviate the suffering of others. In the small office they had set up in the guest room, the girl opened her laptop and continued working on the presentation, entitled "Neuroplasticity and Resilience: How the Brain Recovers from Trauma." On the screen, colorful images showed neural circuits reconnecting, forming new pathways, adapting and overcoming damage, exactly as she herself had done. Outside, the morning sun illuminated the garden, where hardy flowers stood tall towards the light. Silent survivors who, like the young gardener who cultivated them, had transformed adversity into beauty. And somewhere, perhaps in another plane of existence, a man who had lost his humanity and rediscovered it too late watched. Amazed, the imperfect miracle of redemption, not his own, which would forever remain incomplete, but that of the life he had almost destroyed, and that now flourished against all odds, illuminating other paths, inspiring other stories. As the girl had said years before, looking at the stars through her first telescope, "Even when there are dark clouds covering everything, the stars are still up there. We just can't see them for a little while." The darkness had passed. The light finally had prevailed. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to receive new stories every day. What would you do in the millionaire's place? Comment below and share this story with someone special.